and welcome to Think Watercolour. Today I'm going to demonstrate how I painted this Venetian scene of a moored gondola with San Giorgio in the background. Venice is a city of ever-changing light, and I've tried to capture the ethereal, misty early morning light just before the sky becomes its usual bright blue. So let's get started and I'll talk you through my process. I'm starting with the sky on dry paper. This is a very thin wash of Naples yellow with mostly clear water at the top of the sky. I keep the bead wet as I come down the page so that I get a nice smooth transition to darker tones. Here I'm adding a little permanent rose to the bead as I begin to blend towards the darker tones. Now I'm adding cobalt blue, followed by adding some imperial purple to the mix, making sure to paint carefully around the buildings. It doesn't matter if I paint over the mooring poles, as they're going to be much darker later. For the water, which is the San Marco Canal, I've added more cobalt blue to the sky mix. Using a limited palette and mixing the same or similar colours adds harmony to the image. While this wash is still wet, I'm adding some darker streaks, using more pigment and letting them blend wet in wet. This helps to create the illusion of depth in the painting. As San Giorgio is so far away, you can't really see any reflection of the buildings in the water. I'm just dragging a damp flat brush downwards to take out some vertical lines of pigment to suggest the idea of reflection. I've pre-mixed the colours for the buildings, and for the steeple and the dome I'm using a mixture of cobalt blue with a touch of alizarin crimson. Just adding the shadow to one side of the bell tower. This is a yellow ochre and burnt sienna mix for the buildings. The thing about painting buildings so far away is to try not to be too fussy about being perfectly accurate. As long as the basic shapes of light and dark areas are correct, the viewer's eye will do the rest. The thing I like about this scene is that you have light against dark and warm against cool in a natural setting, which makes it ideal for creating a harmonious painting. Also, most of the colours used are complementary, i.e. yellow and orange against blue and violet. Whilst I'm trying not to be too fussy about detail on the buildings, I want the viewer to get the impression of depth, so I'm adjusting tones as I go along to suggest shapes and shadows. Just letting some of the paint colours blend together while they're wet. Now this is the point where, because I'm trying to paint this demonstration as quickly as possible, I make the mistake of painting a strip of land between the islands, which actually isn't there. Fortunately, I noticed it when the painting was finished, and with a damp brush I recreated the gaps between the islands just by lifting out the pigment. Just adding a little bit more definition to the top of the buildings and the side where the shadows are. And when you're putting in details like windows and doors, you don't have to be too accurate at this distance. Just a suggestion of what's there should suffice. For the trees, I'm using sap green and jadeite green wet in wet, just to create some shadows. For the poles or stakes, I'm not quite sure what they're called, where the boats are moored, I'm painting them using yellow ochre, burnt sienna and sepia for the shadow side. By the way, the brush I'm using here is a Cotman flat, and the other brushes I've used so far are mainly varying sizes of the Escoda Perla range. The paper is Saunders Waterford 300 gram high white rough. It's just taped down, I've not stretched the paper first. Once you start putting the foreground darks in, the painting starts to come alive. Adding a few ripples, reflection. And here's a pole that I missed. Just adding that. For the hull of the gondola, I've mixed ultramarine, alizarin crimson and burnt sienna to make a deep deep bluish black, which I'll also be using for the reflection and the ripples in the water below the boat. This is cobalt blue for the protective cover on the seating area, with some ultramarine dropped in wet for the shadows. Just added some ultramarine to the mix for the hull, just for the top of the boat. Strengthen those shadows. And here I'm just adding 3 birds just to aid the feeling of depth and to help the composition feel complete. This is white gouache for the ropes for the finishing touches. And I think we're done. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you learned something from the demonstration. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell to hear about future videos. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, as it helps with YouTube. And thanks again for watching.